VanDerHollis is the name. Sit down, stranger. I don't care what you came here for. As long as you're on my land, you're welcome to sit on the porch. Have some lemonade before you talk to me about your business. I decide about running people off after I've talked to them. Oh, it's about my mine you want to hear about. The Hoopsnake's the finest silver mine in Wonkatonkwa County. It ain't no Cerro Gordo, mind you. The silver quality's better and there ain't no telling just how deep that mine goes. But it's hard to get quality men to work it. Most of the time I can't get more than a score of men down there digging. Still, I produce about 1,000 short tons a year. I ain't the richest man in Wonkatonkwa County, but I'm getting close. And it sure helps that in this place, when the dead rise or men change into monsters, silver bullets are what folks prefer to use to wipe them out. I guess in Hodag Gulch, the only thing harder to find than a good miner is a sober preacher. I'm sure you've heard the rumors that the Hoopsnake's not operating right now. That was true until recently. When my men were digging a new shaft recently, they broke into a cave. And there were things in that cave that, well, let's just say that I'm looking for more good miners these days. And I'm mourning some good men. Not only did the thing in there kill more than a couple of men, but their spirits started haunting the mine too. It was looking for a while there like Wonkatonkwa was going to have a silver shortage. That was until 4 strangers came knocking on my door, just like you did, asking about the mine. Now, with the help of some of the stone talkers, they've cleared it out for me. We're back in production, and you can expect silver bullets to start coming out of the local gunsmithies again. I see that's put your mind at ease about something or other. Good. Now, let's get down to business.
Welcome, partner, to Dead Man's Dice, a chronicle of the first campaign run in my own Undeadwood Weird West RPG, as well as a bit of a development log for the game. Here I'm going to tell you about the events of the campaign, tell you about the game and the setting, share some lore and some ideas with you, and hopefully bring my own bizarre fantasy world of Wonkatonkwa County to life. I'm Brian Rideout, host, author of Undeadwood, and the soul wrangler for this here campaign. Keep your gun handy, pray over your ammunition, and let's slap some leather. This here is episode 3, The Story So Far, part 2. Our 4th play session took place on October 7th, 2024. It was played for about 2 hours late in the evening. When Matt, Patrick, and Shein returned from the Perdition desert, they found that May's voluntary work and careful flim-flamming around VanDerHollis Ranch had bought them an inn. Old man VanDerHollis was not willing to give up a lot of the control of his mine, but he was willing to allow each of the characters to become a 10% partner, so long as they didn't make any major demands about how the mine was run, and that their shares of the mine revert to him upon the event of their untimely demise. This was a larger share than they had hoped for, but a lot less control than they had asked for. After a few moments' deliberation, they decided that that was probably for the best. They didn't want to have to defend or manage the mine until things became extreme. After all, they had bandits to hunt down and a mystery to unravel. They drew up the contract with VanDerHollis, and then journeyed out to the camp around the Hoopsnake Mine. While Jim Donovan, the mine foreman, had to linger a day behind them. He told them who to talk to in camp to get access to the mine, including a passphrase that would get them the keys. And he drew them a rough map of the mine. The maps of the 2 upper floors were fairly complete, although at one point the mine had opened up into an underground river, and they had not charted that area at all. The lower floor, he apologized, did not have a complete map of the newest shafts, as the mine was expanding at a fairly quick rate. Not willing to rush in sight unseen and late in the day, the party spent the evening talking to the various miners about what they had seen or heard, which wasn't much. The men who had been on the lowest floor of the mine never came out again, and VanDerHollis had sent first 3 mercenaries, then one, then two more, with the promise of a $600 reward for clearing the mine. None had come back out again. While checking out the mining camp, the Lost Souls discovered that the local miners had imprisoned an Indian, a member of the nearby Stone Talker clan, a group of the lost folk who had always protested the white man mining in the region. He introduced himself as Hania, a medicine man in training. He had heard about the trouble in the mine and wanted to check it out for himself, believing it might be corruption spreading from a taboo site that had recently been desecrated. While the lost folk of Wonkatonkwa County and the newcomers hadn't clashed like the Americans and the Indians back in the United States, the miners didn't trust him and suspected that his magic had caused the chaos in the mines. The Lost Souls were more open-minded and asked him to tell them more. What he told them jived with what they had seen in the ruins out in the desert of Perdition. So they set Hania free and asked him to return to his people and get help. They offered to work together to clear this corruption, and perhaps Hania deal with the desecrated holy site along the way. He assented, but told them it would take at least a week for him to collect shamans that would be able to cleanse the mine. Patrick, May, and Matt volunteered to do some of the guard duty for the camp that night, to watch the mine themselves. Shortly after sunset, while Matt was watching the mine entrance, 4 dead fellows appeared at the entrance, unable to leave the mine due to a hex mark painted on a nearby rock face. When they are in their weakened state, dead fellows don't think very clearly. All they want is the warm touch of life. They are prone to standing at the thresholds of places they cannot go and watch the coming and going of people in a state of deep despair. It's only when they can lay their hands on you that they get that infusion of life, and the worst impulses take over. Deciding he didn't like watching them testing their supernatural boundaries, Matt loaded a bullet that Shein had blessed by praying over it into his buffalo rifle, and blasted a hole through one of the dead fellows at a range of 150 yards. When a dead fellow is truly destroyed, they explode into a cloud of greenish goo, an ectoplasm that has some applications for alchemists and sorcerers. This is a very different effect than if you had simply damaged them enough to force them to discorporate for a few days. Realizing that Matt would happily put every last one of them into a final cold grave, they shuffled back into the mine and out of sight. In the morning, the party proceeded into the upper floor of the mine. After walking through a fairly open antechamber, they entered into the early shafts of the mine. The upper floor of the mine seemed as silent as the grave, although occasionally they could hear a strange knocking from somewhere deeper within. About 20 paces deeper into the mine, they came to a junction. Forward would take them into the more active parts of the mine. On the left was an area where a large vein had been cleared out, and a chamber had been created to house supplies: dynamite, helmets, lanterns, oil, water, picks, and shovels. Aside from borrowing a lantern, the party disregarded it. On the right, a wall had been built, and a metal cage door had been installed to separate the office from the rest of the mine. They found the office door had been left open, despite assurances that it should be closed and locked off. The desk had been rifled, the ledger left open, the medical supplies by the makeshift infirmary rifled through, and several crates containing ingots had been opened. While they could make neither heads nor tails of the ledger, they suspected someone had been in and out of here, and Matt, using his tracking skills, determined that someone had come up from deeper in the mine with muddy boots, while May was quite sure that the lock had been picked, rather than a key used based on scratches on the surface of the lock. Further down, the mine took a bend and blossomed slowly into 4 separate branches. The first right-hand branch curled pretty far off to the side. According to the map, it reached back around the office and went deeper into the earth. They followed that one first. A short ways down, they found a corpse lying by the side of the pathway. He had taken several bullet wounds, and a number of casings made of a material that crumbled when they touched it were found near the body. The man was dressed in the fancy clothing of a pistolero, and had several guns on him, although nothing as high quality as what they were already carrying. Based on what they had learned from the necromancer Letitia Quimby, they decided to perform a purification ritual on the body. Last rites performed on a corpse whose spirit was walking around as a dead fellow would destroy the dead fellow as quickly as a silver bullet. Once they were satisfied that the dead man had been purified, they moved on to see what was further down the hallway. and at the very end of it, near where they ought to be at the back wall to the office, they found someone had cleverly piled some rocks over additional mining supplies and explosives, as well as a vat of chemicals that may identified as ones used for softening rock. Checking the wall behind the cache, they found that someone had been slowly working on the stone as quietly as they possibly could, mostly melting it till it was soft and then chipping away at it. Before all hell had broken loose on the mine, it was clear that someone had been trying to break into the office from behind the wall. They had a thief on their hands. When they returned to the junction, they immediately came under fire. A group of dead fellows had come up from deeper down in the mines and decided to bushwhack them. Thankfully, as Jeb Sorza was once heard to say, being dead doesn't necessarily improve one's aim, and the party was able to take cover during the first few rounds. While dead fellows glow in the dark, they don't exactly present a very easy target, and while they see perfectly well in the dark, the lost souls were not so lucky. The first exchange of fire only managed to wound one of them, and bring none of them down. Patrick and Matt were forced to creep forward, hiding behind pillars, trying to get a clearer shot, while the dead fellows took good advantage of the twisting shape of the mine shafts to fire back from cover. Shein eventually got the idea to rush forward herself, take a couple of shots, and then rebuke them with a fiery prayer. The force of her faith compelled the dead fellows to flee deeper into the shaft, allowing Matt and Patrick to charge forward and engage them at point-blank range. Fanning the hammer with a revolver full of blessed bullets, Patrick made quick work of the two dead fellows. The charge had led them to a dead-end mine shaft, and now there were only two unexplored routes in the upper floor, one to the elevator down, and one to a mine shaft that hadn't been producing much, and so had been put on temporary hiatus to dig at richer veins. In that one they found the dead bodies of a man and a young woman, obviously two of VanDerHollis' mercenaries. They didn't have much to identify them, but the lost souls decided to grab a few trinkets in case that Donovan might be able to recognize who they were. While searching them, they found one of the rare revolvers made by the local gunsmith, one of his masterpieces that the locals call the winding buzzard feeders. Patrick claimed the exceptional .44 as a prize, hoping that the kin of its former owner wouldn't ask for such a fine firearm back. After that shootout, they were feeling a bit winded, and so decided to go back to the surface, turned over what they hoped would be identifiable trinkets from the 3 corpses they had already located, and collect up some paint to draw some hex marks, thinking that they might be able to control how the undead move through the mine. By painting hex marks every few paces, they would be able to lock down the mine from the undead's movements, which was the end of our 4th play session. Our 5th play session was played over 2 hours on the evening of October 14th. Interested in examining the ectoplasm the undead had left behind, and looking into other possibilities, May decided to stay on the surface while the other 3 went deeper down. They fired up the elevator and operated it themselves to get to the 2nd floor of the mine. The 2nd floor of the mine is essentially horseshoe-shaped, with several mine shafts winding off of the main body. A link between either end of the horseshoe where the 2 ladders were created was made through a narrow shaft too tight for human beings to get through, and boarded up. And this time they decided to come down prepared. Each of them put on a mining helmet with an oil lamp attached to it, and lit it up. They also loaded a minecart full of explosives, and brought it down with them in case they would need them for future troubles. While there was effectively a small crack between the 2 ends of the horseshoe, where the 2 mine elevators were located, the crack was only made to run tin piping through from one elevator to another so that the exhaust from the 2nd elevator motor wouldn't fill the mine shaft full of smoke. The first branch of the mine that the Lost Souls passed was boarded up, and so they decided it would be safe to ignore. However, as they were exploring the horseshoe, Matt again observed muddy boot prints left behind by a thief coming and going, and so they were on high alert. As they moved slowly and carefully, crawling through the mine at this point, they heard whispering ahead, and caught a faint glint of ghostly blue-green light. They realized that more dead fellows were waiting for them around a corner. Shein and May pretended to have an argument over whether or not they should open the boards that they had passed by, giving Matt and Patrick a chance to creep into position. They leapt out at their ambushers and opened fire as quickly as they could, They gunned down the waiting deadfellows before they could draw a bead on them. Beyond the pools of ectoplasm that were left of the deadfellows, they found a corpse tucked into a corner. An armed woman they took for one of the mercenaries that had not yet been located in the mine. Her body had turned purple and was swollen all out of shape, as well as needlessly soft to the touch. They concluded that she had been dosed with some sort of incredibly heavy poison, and took a billfold of documents out of her clothing before leaving her where she lay. While they discussed back in the horseshoe what to do about her, they discovered the source of the poison. 3 dog-sized albino spiders came skittering along the ceiling. One of them dropped on Patrick and attempted to bite him. Patrick pulled his new buzzard feeder and emptied it by fanning the hammer, killing 2 of the spiders before they managed to lob venom at them. Matt picked off the 3rd, all of them considering just how close they had come to death. In Undeadwood Weird West role-playing game, venom is particularly insidious. It slowly fills your track full of increasingly nasty injury traits over time, with each one of them adding a new penalty to the list of ones your character is suffering, and each one makes it harder to make a saving throw against the next step up the train. The listed strength of the venom tells you just how far along that train you can get, the most lethal of venoms very easily killing a player character. Beyond the spiders, they reached the crest of the horseshoe, and decided to go down the shaft they knew touched an underground river. Here they found that the mine had built a bridge across to a rich silver deposit on the far side of the underground river, but that the bridge had collapsed into the water. Following a hunch, Matt examined the shoreline and found that the muddy boot prints were coming from somewhere down the river. He surprised that the enterprising thief who had tried to break in above, and eventually succeeded in picking the lock of the office door, had been coming in by way of the river, and that there was clearly a second entrance into the mine. However, the presence of giant spiderwebs along the course of the river cautioned them from going down that natural cavern path. And once again they noticed that they were occasionally hearing strange knocking sounds, as if someone was banging a rock against a wall somewhere deeper in. Several more side branches further along, they came across a strange pile of rubble tucked into one side passage. Examining it, they found that it wasn't rock at all, but rather creatures with lumpy bodies and rocky skin, looking like a strange mix of simian and stone. The chamber was festooned with pictograms, and as they explored it, they discovered that one of the creatures was still alive and observing them from the ceiling, clinging to the stone like an insect clings to plaster. They gently coaxed the creature down, and found that it was not hostile. It appeared to understand at least a little of their English, but could not speak itself. Instead, it tried drawing their attention to the pictograms on the wall, which clearly depicted the mine, and the miners reaching into a place full of green something or other, from which a terrible, looming, horned humanoid figure emerged. It also depicted small, lumpy figures like the creature itself, also digging in the mine, normally under images where the moon was depicted in the sky above the mine. The green something that the horned figure came out of was depicted as something massive and terrible, like a deer with no head where the antlers sprouted out of its shoulders, sleeping underneath a mountain. They quickly guessed that this must be one of the Anaya they had heard of when interrogating the bandits, and guessed that the green effluent running off of this huge creature and creating the monster in the mine shaft must be some kind of magical pollution or corruption that flows off of it. They also, after a little bit of guessing, figured out that the creature itself chewed on ore, and befriended it by giving it a few of the silver nuggets they had harvested for themselves while exploring other mine shafts. They nicknamed it Rocky, and got it to show them where the second floor elevator was. Once they established that there were no more threats on the second tier, they headed back up. Although Rocky would not go with them, Patrick, who developed an especial fondness for the strange creature, exhorted it not to do any further knocking while it was down there. They headed back up and out to talk to Donovan about what they had discovered, and get a good night's rest before they braved the third floor of the mine. They stopped for only a brief time to paint a large hex mark near the entrance to the second floor, to keep the undead from reaching the elevator. Our fifth session occurred on October 21st, and was played for about 2.5 hours late into the evening. In Undeadwood Weird West RPG, Every character has a touchstone. Their touchstone is their way of coping with the madness and supernatural horrors of Wonkatonkwa County. It can be alcohol, it can be drugs, it can be preaching, it can be riding really fast. Whatever it is, if a character indulges in it at some cost to themselves and the rest of the party, they can refill the pools they use to re-roll dice. Patrick's guilty pleasure is gambling, and so he started the session by starting a poker game and challenging Bear Hardy, the most ill-tempered and vicious miner in the lot, as well as a couple of others to play. The camp cook was the man entrusted to keep the cards safe, and he had bribed him ahead of time to use a marked deck of cards, offering to split his winnings. This was Patrick playing for thrills. Can he get away with cheating in front of one of the meanest, biggest, most scary men he could? And in fact, he managed to win several $100s during the game. The dice were strangely kind to Patrick, and when I rolled to see if Bear Hardy would lose his temper, which was more likely than not, the great brute kept his cool. Being a good sport, Patrick gave him back a good chunk of his losings and offered to buy him a drink sometime. Few people treated Bear Hardy well because of his ferocity and his poor sportsmanship. Somehow this touched Bear Hardy, and he and Patrick became friends, giving them their first potential retainer for the course of the campaign. With May once again in the party, they headed back down the next day to explore the lowest floor of the mine. It was once they were down there that Shein had a brainstorm, if you could call it that. She decided she would break out her copy of the Lesser Key of Solomon and summon a demon to guard the mine. She could bind it for a year and a day to attack any who didn't wear a special medallion she would make. She sat, took several stones and created little necklaces with a special sigil on them to serve as her mark. Then she began the lengthy ritual of summoning the demon. Patrick was quite concerned about the choice to summon and bind a demon as a way of creating security for the mine. It seemed an extraordinarily risky move. But our lost souls and the players playing them are risk-takers at heart, and they decided that they would go ahead with it even despite his objections. When he washed his hands of the whole ritual and decided to go scouting ahead, Shein said, "Don't worry, if this goes wrong it's not like bullets will be of any use to us." After all, the kind of spirit she was planning on summoning wasn't something that could be shot down if it decided to take its revenge on the fools who decided to summon it. Matt decided to leave May in charge of keeping Shein safe and join Patrick in the exploration. When they came near the passage that connects to the underground river, they found fresh, muddy tracks. So fresh, in fact, that they're pretty sure that whoever it was, they either passed in the mine or was hiding very close to them. Using his keen skills of observation, Patrick managed to pinpoint the thief to hiding in the same shaft where they had found the bloated body, a little bit between them and the ritual site. The two of them feigned a fit of conscience, and Patrick claimed he would go back to guard the ritual after all, while Matt turned his back to the shaft from which they were pretty sure they were being watched. No sooner had Patrick taken up a good ambush spot than the thief attempted to sneak up on Matt, only to find a gun pointed at the back of his head. The man they captured identified himself as Ned Landry, one of the miners that was presumed missing after the disaster. Landry had been planning on stealing a significant amount of silver and then disappearing down to the south end of the county as quick as he could. It was his dig site they found above attempting to break into the mine, and the signs of his lockpicks on the office door. With only a few sharp cuffs, they got him to confess that he had a stash of silver, and indeed had found a way out of the mine by way of the underground river, and that he had found the nest of the giant spiders down that way and burnt most of it out, causing the remaining spiders to begin roaming into the mine. He couldn't tell them about the incident that occurred below. He had taken advantage of it to head up the river and make himself missing, hoping that he would be able to plunder the mine at his leisure. Now that he was caught, he decided he was going to play it as cool as possible. He had no interest in fighting a heavily armed group that was so deeply enmeshed in the occult. Instead, he told them what he could of the lower floor, and what he knew of what was going on in the mine. He was able to tell them about what the work schedule was on the day of the disaster, and thus which shaft they should check for trouble down on the lowest floor. It was at this time that Shein completed her ritual and bound an incredibly powerful demon to her command. She bound it for a year and a day to protect the mine, to attack anyone who entered without one of the special stone charms she had made, and to harm anything that attempted to hurt a miner in the mine. Thus prepared, they headed down to the lowest floor of the mine. Along the way, they were reunited with Rocky, who was keeping an eye out for him. Landry identified Rocky as a Tommyknocker, a sort of strange fairy that lives in the deep mines. The Tommyknockers will do some of the work for the miners, and often warn them of danger by knocking on the rock walls from somewhere deep within the mine. So long as Tommyknockers are not interfered with and not seen, they are generally a boon. If mistreated, they begin sabotaging the mine, even causing injury or death to the miners within. They had suspected that there were Tommyknockers in the mine, but attempting to verify that fact could cause them great danger. He had never seen anyone able to tame such a creature before. He verified the Lost Soul's suspicion that the new shaft had somehow connected to this creature, once they got the information they needed from him, and also confirmed that he had a sizable stash of silver. They took him back to the surface and quickly told Donovan what he had been up to. They then put him in the care of Bear Hardy, who promised the fellow would go nowhere until Patrick and company had a chance to further interrogate him. Assured that the thief was going nowhere, they headed back into the mine, collecting Rocky along the way, and went down to the 3rd floor. They headed straight for the new shaft, and as they approached, they found their eyes swelling and their nose rebelling against toxic spores. Thankfully, May was on the case, and quickly mixed up an herbal smear that placed under the nose and eyes would help protect against the histemic effects of the spores. She had applied it to everyone but Patrick when the thing arrived. The creature, which in-game is called a crawler, is a being that looks like it's made mostly out of rotting bone and emaciated flesh, caked top to bottom with mycelia and fungus. While roughly humanoid, its head closely resembles the skull of an elk, and it chattered its horrible exposed teeth as it came. Matt cranked the lever, trying to slow the thing down with holy rifle cartridges, but mere bullets didn't seem to deter it. In a desperation move as the party shuffled backwards, Patrick, barely able to see, pulled out a bundle of TNT that Shein had prayed over. He lobbed it at the creature and fired. Although he could barely see, he had been practicing for years shooting things out of the air that he had thrown, and had a pretty good idea of where it was. The blast knocked the party backwards, injuring Patrick and leaving Matt disoriented. And still the creature came on despite its flesh hanging off of it in ribbons. It raised a fist to crush Patrick, and that's when the spirit that Shein had summoned fulfilled its bonds and brought the now destabilized roof down on the creature, burying it under a ton of rock. The party staggered out, victorious, tired, and with Patrick nearly deaf and blind at the time. While he laid down, they informed Donovan of their victory, and the fact that they were going to have to go back down in there, but that they didn't intend to do so until they were in better shape. My group was unable to meet on October 28th. The few of us who could make it ended up spreading democracy for Super Earth for most of the night. Our 6th session occurred on November 2nd, and as always started fairly late, and ran only a couple of hours. While Patrick continues to experience a little tinnitus, he's feeling much better in the morning, and they're all able to take the treatment that May had prepared for them. But rather than going in the mine the usual way, they had Landry take them to where he was keeping his stash. They found that he had stolen 40 pounds of silver ingots, and stashed them at a small inlet that connected to the underground river. They handed him 2 of the silver bars, worth over $100, and told him never to be seen in Hodag Gulch again. They then secured the rest in the camp and headed in to verify that the creature was dead. Beyond the cave-in where the crawler's rotting corpse could only barely be seen, they found a cavern full of greenish glowing sludge, caked over with spores, and walls crawling with mycelium and fungus. They barely noticed a handful of mushroom-coated corpses laying in the various corners of the chamber. Both May and Shein could feel the terrifying corruption of the place, and decided to back out. They knew there were Stone Talker shamans coming to cleanse the evil, and so they heaped rocks across the entrance to the new shaft, and when they left the mine again, ordered Donovan to have the whole thing cemented shut. Exhausted and knowing it would take a few days for the Stone Talkers to reach them, they decided they were going to go back to Hodag Gulch, get a bath and some liquor. Along the way, they debated fiercely about whether or not they should turn over the silver. After much debate, They each took $200 worth of silver for themselves and turned over the remainder, worth still well over $1,900 of silver, to VanDerHollis as they passed his ranch. They told him about what they accomplished, how the creature was dead, the cavern sealed, and stone talkers on their way to purify the mine. He agreed that they had held up their end of the bargain and signed the contracts, making them all 10% shareholders in the Hoopsnake Mine. Exhausted, they headed back into town, spent a few days carousing to put themselves back together, and then returned to the Hoopsnake Mine to oversee the purification when the Stone Talkers arrived only hours after they did. The lead medicine man who had come to help purify the mine told the lost souls that the Anaya constantly corrupted the earth, and only proper blessings on their resting places would keep them from creating corruption like this. That the Wahpeton gang had occupied one of their sacred spaces, and not let any medicine man through to bless the Anaya. In fact, he was quite sure they were worshipping it, one of the darkest taboos of his people. They assured him that they had their own run-ins with the Wahpeton gang, and that they were very interested in seeing them ousted from that holy site. They made sure they knew how to contact him for the future, and in the process made history of being the first mine owners in the county to have a friendly relationship with the Stone Talker clan. They stopped by VanDerHollis again to let him know that things were underway, and while they were there handed him a handful of amulets Shein had made to prevent the spirit that was protecting the mine from attacking people, in the process making the lost souls indispensable to the mine. For the next year at least, VanDerHollis couldn't have them killed if he wanted more of those amulets. From there they returned to Hodag Gulch, with plans on how to make a future in this county now that they had a secure source of income. They knew in time that would bring them across the Wahpeton gang, but they had other things they wanted to do as well, like an upcoming shooting contest they learned was going on across the river in Embrujada, a Spanish-speaking region of the county that is famous for its horses. After that victory, they felt like they could take on the world, or at least this strange little one they found themselves in.
All right, folks, that's it. Time to move along. What, you want to hear a few things? Well, let old Jeb inform you. This here was narrated by Brian C. Ryder. It is about his role-playing game, Undeadwood the Weird West RPG. It's narrated by him, and the music was all created using the Suno AI by him. Them sound effects have all been downloaded from Pixabay.com. And all the sound mastering, editing, and that handy stuff was done by Stormhead Productions. If you really need to hear more, use that there Twitter contraption to contact @BrianWright7 or email lonesome.cowboy.brian@stormheadproductions.ca. That's it. Thanks a lot. And remember, never approach a bull from the front, a horse from the rear, or a fool from any direction. Demons, mutant monsters, giant spiders, thieving miners, grouchy gamblers. That sounds just like Saturday night down in Willow-Wisp.